Hi, Maureen.
Hello.
So what I was most, I don't know how to share my screen. That's my first problem.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't we? Well, let me stop the recording for a second. Um, okay. So yeah, so the training today is on the reporting tool in Brightspace. So or all the different reporting tools that there are that you can pull out information about your students and their progress and their engagement in Brightspace. So this is intended to show you different areas that's kind of bubbling up data that can help you determine, are students logging in regularly? Are they completing tasks? Are they at risk for failing? And I understand you're an adult ed, so your students maybe not be failing per se, but you can at least gauge some engagement strategies in there. So we're going to talk about the different places in Brightspace where you can see what's going on with your students. So there's different ways to monitor progress. So besides the gradebook, because a lot of times that is the definitive place for instructors to go to see how are my students doing. But there's a lot of places in Brightspace that kind of give you the bigger picture, because you might have a student who's acing the class and has A's on all of the assignments, but then when you look at their kind of class engagement and the way that they work with your course and experience your course and access resources and stuff, they're not in there very much. They're not spending very much time in there. And what does that mean? And then you may have someone who's doing really poorly in the class that just can't pass a quiz, that just can't get a passing grade on an assignment, but then you look at their class engagement and you see, wow, they're in here every day. They're spending, they're re-watching videos that I have in here. All of those kinds of things tells you a story of like, well, this is a really engaged student. They're just struggling with the material, versus someone who's doing that poorly and also never logging in. And you're like, well, this is a poor student who's not actually trying. So it helps give you that a bigger picture about what's happening with your students. So I'm gonna, on the next slide, we're gonna talk.
Elisa, excuse me. There's a student that's trying to get in.
What do you
Her
mean?
name is Diane Borm. She'd like to come in to your workshop.
Okay, she's not. I'm looking at there's no one in the waiting list, in the waiting room.
She just needs the number. She just needs the number or something.
Did she email you or?
No, she called me on the telephone.
How do you know? Oh, okay. How do you want me to send her the number, or do you want to tell her over the phone?
Oh, can you do that for me?
So when we talk about class progress, we're going to look at some different areas. And this slide, we may not look at all of these things. Places where you can look at how students.
Oh.
Oh, sorry, you're right. I forgot to reshare my screen. Thank you. So we might not cover all of these areas specifically, but when I share this PowerPoint with you, it'll provide you with different places that you can go to look at student completion and student engagement. So when we get into Brightspace, I'm going to show you a number of these things. And then, so we're going to start with class progress. So I'm going to minimize this. Can you see Brightspace now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. So this is a sample course that I have because I don't want to share real student data, but we're going to start with and let me just pull up in another place for myself. We're going to start with class progress. So class progress is a tool that kind of gives you an overview of what the students are working on. And actually, before I get into that, I'm going to start with the reports that you see on your homepage. So oftentimes we see these class engagement, course access, and tool access tools. Some of us may have clicked on them. Some of us may never have clicked on them. But these give you a nice kind of insight as well. So I'm going to start with this report before I actually get into the class progress. So first is the class engagement. Oops. Sorry, I have to be in the correct role, I believe, in order to see some of these tools. Okay, so first is the class engagement. So what this shows you is how many students haven't visited the course in 7 days. So that's a really helpful kind of indicator if someone's not coming in and doing the work. 7 days is like a full week, so it means they've missed a week of activity. And that's really important to keep track of in a remote learning environment or distance learning environment, because the students, if they're not engaged, they're not keeping up with what they need to be doing. So that tells you how many students haven't visited the course in the past 7 days. And then you have this nice little grade distribution. So you can see that, you know, hopefully this is a bell curve. Typically in a normal class, I only have 5 students in this class, so it's not, maybe 6 students, so it's not going to be as real, I would say here. But what this lets you do is also filter by which students are in those areas. So if I click this 0 to 50, the student that's failing, it's going to filter this group by just the students who are doing that poorly. And then I can actually, you know, kind of quickly email those students right from here and be like, hey, you're not doing very well. You're not keeping up in the class. To cancel out that filter, I can just click this X here and it brings up, again, my entire list. What this also shows you is the last visited, like when they last accessed this course. And that's really helpful too, to show you, you know, I've got 3 students in this example class that have never accessed my course. So in the beginning of the semester, that first week, this might be something that you're looking at to be like, who has or has not logged in. I can also see, you know, how engaged they are with discussions. This table here is kind of set in stone. You can't change, you know, I can't see, you know, assignments or quizzes versus discussions. It's basically just like the engagement in the class, and Brightspace defines engagement as discussion. So this is kind of a quick kind of overview of how your students are doing. If I go back to the course home, there's also a course access link, which gives you, it's not specific to students, it just shows you, generally speaking, what days of the week and days of this past week students are accessing the course. So sometimes you'll see if you have everything that's due on Friday, Fridays are the time that most people are accessing that course. This is less useful if you want specifics to specific students, but it's a nice way to gauge, you know, kind of look over time how often and what days students are accessing the course. There's also tool access that I'm not going to get into, but it shows you their engagement with different tools. So how many students are working or accessing assignments versus grades, which is probably the main ones they're accessing. So class engagement is a really helpful tool on here. This little graph that you see here is just telling you if for each week what days the activity is the most, like what days students are in your class the most. And that's very similar to the course access. Okay. So the next report that I'm going to show you is called class progress. So if I click on course admin, there's this tool here under learner management called class progress. If your course admin is alphabetical, or sorted by name, then you would just look for it alphabetically. Class progress. So depending on how your course admin is configured. If we look at class progress, this gives you a very similar view to that class engagement, in that it shows you a table now that can actually be a little bit more customized. So it has a list of all of your students. It has this column for content completed, and that means how much of the content have they gone through. So if you have all of your content set up, and we're going to talk about content in the next report as well, which is the table of contents report, to really see how they're engaging with the content. But every single piece of content is identified as something that students are supposed to make their way through, and those are those little check marks. When you're a student, every time they access a piece of content, there's a little check mark. Or if they complete an assignment, there's a little check mark. So this kind of shows you how engaged they are in the content that you have available to them. So you can see that I've got 2 students here who haven't interacted with my content at all, meaning they're not really even accessing the course material. And then I have 1 that's doing really well. Let's say, you know, I've got 13 things for them to do from the beginning of the semester up until where we are today, and the student has done about half of them because the rest of it's due this week, let's say. So this student is kind of on target. And then this student has only accessed one of the 13 things that they're meant to. So there's just a little bit less engaged. The next one is objectives, but what's really nice about this is I can change what is shown to me on this table. So objectives, we don't really use that much at city colleges yet. Hopefully one day we'll be more engaged with it, but we don't use that. And similarly, this logins is misleading. So I just want to indicate that this logins column means logins to Brightspace in general. It's not course access. So it's not how many times they access this course. It's logins to Brightspace. So this 4 logins might be 4 logins to Brightspace, and the student may have been accessing different courses. So these 2 columns are kind of misleading for me, and it's not something that I necessarily want to look at. So those might be 2 that I opt to change, and I'll show you where you change those. And then lastly is this nice little graph on their grades. So you can see the student who's kind of failing, they haven't done very well on the 4 things that they've completed, except one of them they've gotten 100% on, whereas this student is kind of, you know, they're all over the board, 80s, 90s, they're doing pretty well. And this student has done a lot. And these little tables just kind of give you an insight into how your students are doing compared to each other. Now to change what those columns are, if I click on settings, I can choose that instead of objectives, which is that second one that really we don't have much data for at city colleges, I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow and choose to replace that. And by doing that, I can see all the different things I can replace that with. So actually, what's more useful to me is their assignment performance, or if you're an instructor that uses checklists heavily, you can do a checklist completion summary. Or if you prefer looking at discussions, like you use a lot of discussions in your class, that may be a more valuable piece to look at, or quizzes. So, and survey completion, we're not using surveys that much, so that may not be as useful for me. But let's say for this first one, I'm going to change it to assignments performance summary, and then I'll save that. And then let's say, so now that's changed the assignment submission, the objectives one that was here, it's now changed to assignment submissions, and that gives me a little bit more information. So this student has turned in 2 assignments, this student only 1, and they didn't do so well. That gives me some more information. Maybe I want to do the same with logins, because I want something to give me more information. So this login history, I'm going to replace as well, and this time I'm going to replace it with quiz performance. And so that, okay, so I don't have many quizzes in here. We'll let Naima join audio. I don't have as many quizzes in here, so it's not as much information. Hi, Naima. We're just talking about the class progress now, and then we'll move on to another report soon. Oh, hi.
Sorry, I'm late. I had a meeting. We had a meeting.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm glad you guys could join. Okay. So this is the class progress summary. So for those of you who just joined, we're talking about reporting tools in Brightspace and the ways that you can see how students are engaged in your class. We've covered 2 of those already. Right now, this is the class progress tool. You can find this under course admin, but I will be sending the PowerPoint and the recording once we're done, so you can catch up from there as well. So we're pretty much done with this class progress tool. So moving along from here, the next way, the next really useful way to see students' engagement in the class, besides class progress, is under content. Many of us are building our course with all the material and content, and we might be organizing that by weeks, by units, by materials, things like that. And sometimes I just don't know what my students are doing. You know, I don't know how many of them are taking advantage of that video that I put up there, how many are taking advantage of how many are actually reading the PowerPoints that I'm putting up there before they take the quiz or before they do the assignment. So there's a report in content called it's basically the table of contents report. So if you click on table of contents, that takes you kind of to the high level of all of your content. And there's this button up here called related tools. And if you click on that, the very last option in that dropdown is view reports. What view reports gives you is kind of overall statistics for how students are spending time in your course. So this first tab, which is content, it shows you how many users have engaged with your content. So in this class, I think I have 5 students and 4 of them are engaging with my content. Oh no, that's not right. I have 4 students in this class and 1 user has engaged with my content. I'll go to another class to show you more meaningful data. And then you can see the average time spent overall on content. So let me show you another class. That in this one, I don't want to show you specific student data. This is not real students. It's a training course that I'm creating, but I also don't want to show you their real information. But at least I can show you kind of the overall statistics. So I have 17 users in this class, and 12 of them have visited content. So I have 5 of them who haven't really engaged with it. And the average time spent on the content is 54 minutes, about an hour. And that's because I have PowerPoints in here and videos and the recordings for them to watch. So that might be why that's a little skewed, 54 minutes. So if I scroll down, I can see in each module how many users have visited and how much time they've spent in that area. So in module 2, you can see 5 people access the recording, 8 people access the PowerPoint, 6 people access the summary that I have for that thing, 11 people took the quiz and accessed the quiz from here. All of these things give me some information about how many students are engaging with that content. And you'll notice, when it gets towards the end of the semester, that kind of drops off. So here we have, this is the most recent week that I went through in this class, and only 1 student has come here and looked at 1 thing. So this kind of gives you, you can see the engagement, how it kind of ebbs and flows. And if I clicked on these numbers, I would see who is the student or students who have looked at that content. So that gives you an idea as well. I'm going to go back to the old course because I don't want to show you real user data. But if I click on this users tab, I can then see a whole list of my classes and how many content topics they've visited. So you can see only 1 of my students have visited content topics, and I have 5 topics, and then the rest of them haven't visited any. So this typically in a typical class, this will be like, some students will kind of rise to the top, will be like, if there's 20 topics, you might have the first few that, have hit 17, 18, whatever, and then you have a few at the bottom that will have hit, 1 or 0. This kind of gives you that overview of if you have a student who you don't think has been really engaged, not responding to emails, not coming to your Zoom sessions, not doing the quizzes, if you're not, but then they're doing like, really well on assignments or really well on quizzes, you might come in here and be like, well, are they engaging in the class or are they not engaging in the class? And are they looking at the material or they're not? So you have a student who's like failing every quiz, but then you come and look at the content, this content summary, and see that they don't access, they haven't been accessing the PowerPoints that you might have posted, or they're not reading the material that you have in there. That kind of gives you an idea, well, that makes sense. That's why they're not doing well. Versus a student who may not be doing well, but you come in here and they're like accessing every single resource that you have and spending time on it and accessing it multiple times. That kind of gives you that insight, well, the student is really trying. They just may not be grasping the material. And so maybe that's a reason to reach out and be like, I see that you're really engaged. How can I help? Maybe they have test anxiety or whatever it is. All of this information is just that. It gives you information to help you, better support your students or find out where students are falling off, things like that. So that's the table of contents report. There's another place that you can access from here or from class progress, where is if I clicked on this student's name, if I click on the student's name, it's going to take me, Oh no, it's not taking me where I want. Sorry, that's a lie. Don't click on the student's name. I'm going to show you this next report back from class progress. I didn't do it while I was on class progress. So this is where a few of you came in, but under course admin is the class progress link, and that takes us back to where we were when some of you came in here. If you click on a student's name from class progress, it takes you into their individual progress. And what's really nice about this is it kind of gives you a whole complete overview of one specific student. So on this first tab, or not first a tab, first kind of navigation item, I guess, I'm getting the summary, which is overall, you know, how many grades they've received, and I can expand that and see on everything what they've received on each of the grade items. I might squish that. I'm going to skip over objectives. Content, I can see which topics and how many topics they've engaged with. Discussions, I can see how many discussions they've created or replied to. Assignments, I can see how many assignments they've submitted to, what their score was, if there's any assignments that are still awaiting. This kind of just gives you that giant overview on how this student is doing. What's really nice is, and that kind of actually, let me scroll back up, these are the same categories that you can see on the left-hand side here, but you can filter by these specifically on the left. So course access is another one that there were various places that you can see this, but course access is another one if you're like, when's the last time this student logged in? If I click on course, not logged in, access this course. And that's a huge distinction in Brightspace because there's something over here called login history. That's not log into your course, that's log into Brightspace. So if the student is enrolled in like 4 classes, that login history is going to be misleading because that's going to track every time they've logged into Brightspace whether or not they've opened your course specifically. But course access is how many times they've accessed your course specifically. And that's the one that you want to focus on. Login history is not useful to you at all. But course access shows you how many days visited in the last 30 days. So hopefully this number would be like in the last 30 days would be maybe, you know, 20 days or 15 days, so like every other day. It also tells you the last day they accessed the course. So in this student's case, it was today. So it's great. They're super engaged. It shows you absences, essentially, which is this absent period. So if it's been, if this student had July 1st underneath here and then May 20th, I'd see an absent period of like 10 days or 9 days and then 20 days. And so that you can see that breakdown of student access in the course and how many days they're absent, meaning how many days they haven't accessed it from the last time. So that's useful for you too, especially in the adult education environment, to see specifically how students are engaging with the content, or if they're logging in every day, or if they're doing the activities that they need to be doing. So that's the individual progress. So again, I got here from class progress and I just clicked on a specific student. So when I'm in class progress, I can click on any of these students to get that kind of detailed view. You can also get there from the grade book. So when you're in the grade book, I'm going to go to assessments and grades. And if I click on this graph icon next to the student's name, that takes me to that same individual progress of that student. It specifically filters into the grade category, but I can click on any one of these to get to the entire summary. So that's individual progress. Any questions about class progress or the individual progress or engagement? Any of the things that we've covered so far?
I don't have any comments.
Great. Okay. So the next pieces of reporting that I'm going to show you are specific to the tools themselves. So we have a report for quizzes, a report for rubrics, and those are the two I think I'm gonna highlight the most. Give me 1 second while I check my list. Yeah, okay. So the first one I'm going to show you is, well, let me ask you guys, do you use quizzes in your class? Not necessarily for like testing, but for automatically graded things so that so students can kind of either test themselves or.
I haven't as of yet, but I plan on it when I learn more about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I know they'll have me teaching a course. So yes, so in the past I have used it in Brightspace just as a formative assessment, just to see where
Great.
they are on something,
Yeah.
but not as not as more summative, but more as just to let me know where they are in the learning process.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, what's really great about the statistics that you can see in a quiz, other than just like scores, like how did my students do? What's really cool is that you can get insight into your question. So if everyone's getting a certain question wrong, you can see, oh, did I word that strangely, or did they just not study it? Like, did I cover this question? What did you say?
Yeah, they had something like that back in the Brightspace. I mean, in the Blackboard days. You could tell poorly worded or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it helps you kind of reflect on your own assessing and or figure out what you need to like recover. So I'm going to use this other class again, the one that has more, real or student data, although they're not really students, so I'm not going to show you their specific information. But what I will do is I'm going to go into the quizzes, and on each of the quizzes, you can do this once students have submitted and received a grade and all of that kind of stuff. When you click on the drop-down arrow of a quiz, there's this option called statistics. And when you click on statistics, it's going to show you a few things. First is the user statistics. So I'm not going to scroll down too far on this page because it lists the student names. But what I will show is it does a score distribution. So you can see this is kind of a general like bell curve. This is pretty average in terms of what you would typically see in a class, where you have a few that do really well, a few that do really not well, and then most of them kind of fall in the middle. So it shows you that score distribution in the class average. In this class, I would be kind of concerned about this, and I was when I got these results, that the average is like not even passing. Then I learned after I received this feedback that this quiz was more challenging, right? That I was using trick questions that I didn't realize were trick questions. So if I click on the question stats, that's going to give me a distribution as well on the average. It's going to show me the same kind of class average when it comes to the questions. But what I get to see down below that is each question and the average correctness of that question. So you can see here that question 6, everyone got right. So that means either it was a really easy question, or everyone studied that, or I covered that so much and it was one of those questions that everyone knew. Whereas everything else is kind of falling, at the pass level. So when I look at this, sometimes I'll have a question where like only 20% got right. It'll be down here. And that might be a question that I'm like, whoa, what happened here? And did I put the wrong right answer? Or if like no one got it right, did I accidentally choose the wrong right answer? So that happens a lot. So in this case, I might look at the ones that are like 50% and below, because that's still telling me something. I may even look at the ones that are 60% and below, especially if it's a quiz that was like, everyone should have like passed this with flying colors. If I think that about a quiz, I might look at all of them. But in this case, I might look specifically at question 2. And by doing that, I can see, oh, sorry, not here. By doing that, I'm just seeing what the question is. So this helps me see like, okay, what was the question? What is the right answer? And I might look at this and be like, oh yeah, whoops, that was the wrong right answer. I shouldn't have chosen that, and that was my fault. Or I would be like, oh yeah, that was the question. They should have gotten this right. Like there's no reason. I didn't do anything wrong there. So this kind of gives you that insight into the distribution, like what is the distribution of like my hard to easy questions? Like in this case, I feel like I would have liked to have more questions that more people got 100% right. But if I click on the very last tab, which is question details, this digs into that next, it digs into the next part, which is for each question, what did people choose? And so in this case, for my first question, this was kind of a training on Brightspace. So if an instructor asks, where do I go to see my list of students? We all know the answer is class list, but because I put this kind of trick question on here, roster, even though Brightspace doesn't have a tool called roster, 3 people chose that because in all honesty, it was kind of tricky. So in that case, I might come back and be like, well, later, I might decide to throw out roster because that was really misleading. Or no, students should, I mean, these students could have looked at where the roster was, or the roster was, or the list of students was, and realized that there was nothing called roster, but it was called class list. So things like that, it helps you kind of reflect on your quiz data and responses. So I would go through here and be like, the one that's correct has this little arrow, and I can see that 50% got it right and 50% got it wrong because they chose this last one. So that's interesting to me. So it's just another way to see how your students are responding to things. Like this question 6, where I asked, Chrome is the only browser that Brightspace works with. Everyone said false. I'm glad everyone said false. Brightspace works in every browser, although Chrome is the one that we like to recommend. And so these kinds of, this kind of data that it's telling me is I can just see kind of big picture without looking at a specific student. How are students responding? Something like this where the majority are getting it right and only 1 or 2 are getting it wrong, that tells me it's a good question. It means it's finding the students who are getting it wrong either didn't read it correctly or closely or just didn't study, things like that. So it helps me like validate the questions themselves. And if you're into like statistics, it has all of those beautiful standard deviation percentages and things like that. I'm not going that far into it, but a lot of people really enjoy that kind of those statistical analysis. So, and as Naima discussed, like this, we had a tool similar to this in Blackboard, which kind of gave you that overview. So those are the quizzing statistics, which I think are really valuable when you're trying to look at how students are responding to things. And you can certainly look at this at the individual student level when you look at a student's attempt from the gradebook or from the quizzing tool, and you can look at how they've answered questions and which ones they got wrong, and you're like, oh yeah, this student is struggling. But this is a nice kind of high level view of that. The next tool, and I don't know if any of you guys do any of you guys have any of you guys used rubrics in Brightspace? Naima, you have?
Would you repeat that, Elisa?
Yes.
Has anyone used, so I was asking Karen if anyone has used rubrics in Brightspace, and Naima had said she has.
Yeah, I did, but the way, it was such a challenging thing, the way how the rubric is set up in the rubric option. For me, it was. So, yes. I'm actually scheduled for that class because it's different from the way previously. So I found it to be challenging to use it. And that was probably just because I needed a class.
Yeah. I think I'm doing one next week. Am I doing one next week? I'm doing one at some point. So hopefully I'll see you there.
Okay.
Okay, so, but I'm going to talk about the rubric statistics, and rubrics are really cool. If you don't know what, I mean, like we all, as instructors, we know what rubrics are. It's kind of the guide on how to grade student work and provide that feedback very objectively, so that you're not putting a subjective spin on it, because you're creating a rubric that is like, if they meet this, standard, or if they meet this criterion, then they've done these things, and these are the things that I'm looking for very objectively. It helps students also understand what the expectations are to make sure that they can meet those standards. And if they're not meeting those standards because either they didn't pay attention to the rubric or the instructions, or they struggle with some of those pieces. So it tells you a lot of information. But what's really cool about the rubric statistics is it kind of gives you a very similar overview like the quiz statistics. So I'm going to, under assessments and rubrics, this is where we can get the statistic data, but it's also where you create rubrics. I'm not going to talk about creating rubrics today, but there is going to be a training on that, I think, next week. It should be on the training calendar, and you can sign up for that. But I'll just show you what a rubric looks like. And this is kind of a blank, it was created just to show as an example. Maybe it would be nice to show you one that was real, but you can get the idea that you have your criterion here. So this may be like a thesis statement and like what the thesis statement should include. So your level 4 might be like, you know, includes all of the, makes an argument, includes all of the, basically what is going to be presented in your entire paper. And the second one might be paper structure. And level 4, you would describe as, you know, has 5 paragraphs, has 3 arguments, whatever it is that identifies what that paper should have included. And you can have as many criterion as you want. And then you kind of add these little descriptions into each of the levels that indicates to students, you know, like a 4-point or a level 4 paper has this, a level 3 paper has this. And it kind of provides that kind of structure. So just like a rubric that you've seen, you know, in the table with all the different levels. I'm assuming you all have seen a rubric.
Yes.
When you go to assign a rubric to an assignment, you do that at the assignment level. So when you're creating an assignment, there's an option in the tool itself. So it's only if you're creating or editing the assignment from the assignment tool will you see this option. You won't see the option if you're building the assignments from content. But I'm not going to show you, I'm not going to go through that step-by-step process. But when you are editing an assignment from the tool, on the Properties tab, there's an option at the very bottom that says Add Rubric. And that lets you either create a rubric right from there or associate a rubric that you've created from this rubrics tool. So you'll see once you've associated a rubric with an assignment, there's a little, either a lock here that you'll see or a link key a link icon that you see. This link icon says that I've associated with an assignment, or in this case, a discussion, but I haven't graded it with it yet. So this means I could disconnect it. There's no data on this. I've just connected it to something, but I haven't graded with it yet. Whereas this icon, the lock, means that it has been graded against. It's been used to grade, and therefore it can't be deleted or altered in any way. You could copy it and recreate it if you needed to make changes. So when I click on the drop-down arrow of that rubric, there's an option to view statistics. And when I view statistics, I'm going to see, this is kind of a strange, it's kind of unintuitive, because when I first click on it, I see this first tab being activities, and I would assume that I'd see all the assignments that I've attached this rubric to, but it's actually, you're going to see it under competency activities. So if I click on competency activities, then I'm going to see, oh, it's attached to an assignment called assignment 1, which is an assignment submission. So this could be anything, whatever name you gave that assignment, and it tells you that it was an assignment submission. It tells you how many assessments have been done against that rubric. So in this case, I've assessed 2 students, or I've assessed on this rubric twice. The average level overall for those students is, for me, level 3, but this could also be, you know, if you change those level names to exceeds expectations, meets expectations, does not meet expectations, average level 3 might be meets expectations. That's the average level that students are meeting. The average score, depending on if that's a rubric that is out of so many points, it's going to show you the out of score. And then this actions little graph is what's really going to give you the data that you need. So when I click on that actions graph, it's going to show me the general overall statistics of that rubric. So in this case, I've got half my students hit level 4 and half my students hit level 3 overall, not just on individual components, but just overall, that's where they fell based on an average of all of their results. If I click on criteria statistics, that's what's going to give me the details on each of my criterion. So if this was my thesis statement, okay, all of my students hit that thesis statement. That's great. They all got it. If criterion 2 was my, you know, the full structure of the paper, all of my students hit level 3. They didn't quite get there, but they're on their way to get there, right? So all of them hit that. And then let's say level 3 was grammar and spelling. And I have one student who hit that 100%, and then I have one student who hit that, you know, like maybe had like a few grammar and spelling issues, and that was my criterion for that. So this kind of gives me an overview of where my students are falling. In this specific example, I only have 2 students who have been assessed, so it's less meaningful data. But if I had like 20 students of data here, you're going to see kind of a bell curve in here as well. And that kind of shows you if students are on track or which students are on track. And then lastly, there is this individual statistics side, which just gives you the overall score for each student, but it shows you that this student hits their kind of overall at a level 3, the student is overall at a level 4, and when it was assessed and what their score is and all of that kind of stuff. So it's really nice statistics that you can get on the rubric. And what's cool about the criteria statistics is I can copy and paste this into Excel and do some, you know, nice manipulation on it and do a comparison from like this semester to last semester on my own outside of Brightspace. So it's just a nice way to kind of see how students are doing overall. So that's rubric statistics.
That's huge.
Isn't that great? I mean, it's so powerful.
Yeah,
especially when you're talking about data with, you know, when you're talking about data, rubrics can give you that kind of how are my students doing overall on a specific, this doesn't even have to be on a specific, you know, like a paper and like whether or not they get sentence structure. But if you think about it, like child development uses this for their assessment reporting to for their agency that they have to report to. And it's like how many students are meeting that criterion of they know how to observe and describe child challenges or something like that. And they have to indicate how many students are meeting that standard, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool tool. It's a really cool tool.
It also helps to inform how you're creating your instructional plan too, for maybe course or it could set a standard for your particular course moving forward. Like this is, you know, you can identify rigor is happening in the class now. This is huge.
Yeah, and if you think about competencies, like my students need to know they need to meet this sentence structure requirement, or they need to meet these certain more subjective qualities that you can put into objective points, you know, and then seeing how they're doing that. And you can assign the same rubric to multiple assignments so that you can see this assignment really helped them meet those standards, whereas this other assignment didn't really catch that standard as much.
So
this, excuse me, Naomi.
Yeah.
Will this, I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name. Will this help the adult education students?
I mean, if you're using it and depending on what those standards are that you are trying to get them to meet, potentially, yeah.
Like the SO, the student learning outcomes. Can we use it like that? Okay.
Yeah, it's like on the things that you're assessing that are specifically related to those SLOs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It's a great question. Okay. So that's it. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. So that was the last report I wanted to show you. So in these last 10 minutes, I want to open it up for questions, and we can kind of talk about ways in which you're using these reporting tools already, or ways in which you might think you might try to use these activities.
Well, I thought using the rubric would be nice in the adult ed department, because then we could see actually how many students have met those SLOs. Am I right? Am I saying it right? Because I'm still just a little confused on the rubric.
Yeah, let me try to show you another example with a rubric that's a more meaningful rubric. I think if I can pull in, bear with me.
Hi, Lisa. This is Maria. It says Corinne, but I'm Maria. I'm sorry.
Hi.
Hugo checked up for malware on my computer, so that's why it took over an hour. That's why I'm late.
Oh, no problem. I'm recording this though, so I'll share it as soon as we're done.
Thank you. I have a question about Turnitin. Does Turnitin connect with rubrics at any point in Brightspace?
If you use, so Turnitin is, that's a great question. Turnitin is integrated with Brightspace in such a way that it's connected to an assignment. So Turnitin has their own rubrics, but I would recommend using Brightspace's rubric in order to do the statistics that you just saw in Brightspace. That, for instance, I have right here, this is a Turnitin assignment as an example. Here's another sample one. It's in the assignment tool, but I've enabled Turnitin. So if I edit this assignment, technically I've enabled Turnitin and I have all of the settings up for Turnitin that I want. And there's more options in here where I could technically attach a Turnitin rubric in here. But what I would recommend is not attaching a Turnitin rubric. Instead, on the properties tab of that assignment, even if it's a Turnitin assignment, you would add the Brightspace rubric to it here. And then when you're grading, you can do the grade mark in Turnitin, but when you go to fill out the rubric, do that in Brightspace so that the statistics go to Brightspace and have nothing to, not outside in Turnitin.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's a great question. Okay, back to Karen. Let me, I'm still trying to find my example. Give me 1 second.
No, black. Okay.
Maureen, I'm going to mute you. Oh. Okay, so in this class, this is the child development that I was mentioning. Let me show you what the rubric looks like. So the rubric has their standards that students need to meet and how, like, what qualifies them meeting that, or what qualifies them being considered emerging in that, and what qualifies them as being that they do not meet that. So when you're thinking about the SLOs, which might be, give me an example of one of the SLOs.
Well, I don't have one right here in my mind.
Oh, okay.
That one, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So if we think about the, let me just make one up, understanding.
Well, the SLOs have speaking, listening, different aspects of learning, and for each level, it determines how much they need to know and what they're going to be acquiring in each level.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, the SLOs are more of what we would call like competencies or learning objectives, but they can certainly be assessed in a rubric like child development is doing, because child development went through this whole rigmarole in building these things as kind of more competency type things, but it just, the Brightspace's tool isn't fully there. And so rubrics was giving them exactly what they need to do, which is, this is the standard that the student has to meet and whether or not they are meeting that standard based on these criterion. So once this is attached to a assignment, in this case, an assignment called the observation interpretation paper, when we're looking at the statistics of that under the overall, the criterion statistics, I can see that, you know, 1/3 of the class is meeting that standard, 2/3 is emerging, 10% does not meet at all. It does not meet that standard, and then they included an unable to assess option if the student just is, there's nothing that they can't determine where they fall, or they didn't even respond to that piece of it or whatever it is. So this reporting is very similar to what you might get in a kind of competency thing if you're writing that rubric in such a way. Where it gets confusing with rubrics is if you're not, so for instance, this specific rubric that child development uses is specific to one assignment. They do this assessment on the one kind of key assignment, that one that kind of, what would you call that? Like your touchstone project at the end. It's kind of that, this is kind of assessing everything all at once, and that's when you would use this kind of rubric. The SLOs are kind of, you know, threaded through the entire course in most courses, and so to be able to associate that with specific assignments and assess it in that way, you'd want to think through that a little bit more. I don't know if I'm ready to say right now, yeah, you can absolutely build an SLO rubric and attach that to every single assignment and do that kind of assessment. I'd be interested if someone's going to try that out and what that looks like, and I think that's a cool concept, but I don't know officially at this point what that looks like.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, it's at time, so I will stay on for about 10 minutes longer if anyone has any questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for joining. I will share this recording as well as the PowerPoint once we are done, so either later today or on Monday.
Okay.
Thank you.